sing any of the carols. And she would frequently come and just stand alongside of me while the Lord's Prayer was on or anything else. I was the only Jew in the class, pointing out, obviously, that I was not indulging in this. And that used to have its reverberations out on the playground and afterwards. She was an excellent teacher. I got good marks from her, but the religious issue was very, very important to her.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you, Leo, do you think the Depression had a significant effect on you?
While I was at NYU, it hit too. I used to walk from Washington Square up to Grand Central because I saved a nickel subway fare. And when I used to go through Union Square, you know where that is, 14th Street, and at Washington Square, you used to see these men dressed in clothes that they bought at Brooks Brothers, selling apples for 5 cents each, sleeping on the benches. You realized how destitute these people were. They were living on selling apples for a nickel. And it sank in. There's no question about it. It sank in. And at school, the following year I went out to Michigan, and the banks closed the first year I was there. You know, kids all around me leaving school, the bookstores in Ann Arbor, because nobody had money and the banks were closed, they were giving you books on IOUs. Both of them went bankrupt. So, you know, it was all around you. It was part of the atmosphere, the environment. It wasn't things were good for some and bad. It was part of the life you were living in.
At what point in there did you meet Libby?
I met Libby in 1934, and I was introduced by her uncle, who was a partner of my brother Harry's in the wholesale grocery business. Apparently he told her that there was this wonderful young man there who could carry sugar on his back, 100 pounds of sugar on his back. And Mr. Epstein asked me to take him and drive him home. And I did, and when we got there, he told me he had a couple of nieces visiting he wanted me to meet. So I went in the house, and I met Libby, and I met Miriam. And I was attracted to Libby. I don't know what made me go back home and then call and make a date with her for that evening. And I got a date for Miriam. The interesting thing about it is later on, Libby told me that when I came to the house, he told her that she had a date with me. And so that when I called, she was surprised.
What about values or traditions that were important for you to impart to your children?
Well, at my home, my father always talked about that 10% of whatever you get, you should give away. My mother used to have a pushka. Every Friday, my mother would put all of her change, anything she had, in the box. And, you know, she had limited resources. And my father gave it away, whether it was to the school or you didn't have UJA until much later, whether it was the synagogue, whether it was the Hebrew school, whatever it was. My father, of course, I think I refer to it in the booklet about the one time with the Jewish, I don't want to repeat it again, but that was a lesson that I never forgot. I was then 15 or 16.
When you didn't wake up your father and have him take in the wanderer.
That's right. Mm-hmm. The only time in my life that he never hit me, But the only time in my life that I ever remember him being angry with me, really angry, was that time. That really sank into me like nothing you could imagine. I felt terrible that I disappointed him. I felt terrible what I did to this man. I don't know how long that continued.
Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about losing a loved one and how that...
Well, my father's came suddenly. One night, we were sitting around at home, and he starts hiccuping, and he can't stop. Gave him water, we did nothing. We called the doctor. He told us to give him something. We gave it, didn't help. The doctor came down. In those days they came. They didn't say, "I'll see you at the hospital." He came down, and he examined the hiccups, and he wanted us to take him to the hospital. And I remember my brother Charlie picking him up, carrying him as on arms out to the car. And we all went to the hospital. It was a Friday night. And we went to the hospital, and the doctor told us that they were going to have to operate. Can't do anything to stop him. And so they got a surgeon, and on Saturday they operated, and they closed him right up. He was riddled with cancer. Not to have discovered it, imagine in those days, till the very day. And he'd been to doctors over several years, so that had been brewing for years. And he was so riddled with it, they just couldn't even begin it. And he closed him up, and he died within hours. So it was very fast. I was in the room when he died, and what hit me that time was my father's mumbling. I couldn't quite make out what he was saying, and I leaned down to him. He was saying the Shema. You know that, and you know that was always the wish of a religious man, to die with those words on his lips.
So he knew.
So he knew at that point. Mm-hmm. And he died within hours. Yeah. So that was a terrible shock. And that was the first time I came upon it. And that was the time when we sat Shiva at home. We were with my mother, that I developed such respect for that practice of Shiva. We weren't alone. People were bringing food in. Didn't have to cook. People were visiting almost all day long, all evenings. And I used to think sitting Shiva was a barbaric custom. It's just the opposite. It's the most wonderful thing you can do, is visit people during Shiva. And that was my first experience with it.
Maybe I'd like you to tell me what gave you most meaning in your work.
When I was a town court judge in Westport, there was a family in town. The father worked on the railroad on the electric lines, high tension, and earned good money. He'd get drunk Friday night after work and sober up by Monday morning in time to go back to work. His family was mistreated. He had 5 or 6 children. They'd be abused and beaten. And he'd go out Friday, he'd buy, for example, meat, steaks or something for himself. If anything was left over, his family could have it. And he was arrested this particular time for beating up his wife and breaking her arm. Enough that she was sent to the hospital. He had done a lot of that sort of stuff before. He earned good money in those days,